Good morning. You're watching All You Need to Know on BloombergQuint Live, and I'm Alex Matthew. First, the headlines this morning. The UK Parliament forces the government to seek an extension in the Brexit timeline. Johnson is going to mull elections. Axis Bank reports a surprise loss after adjusting for a one-time cost in an otherwise operationally strong quarter. MD and CEO says slippages will remain elevated given the macro situation. Asian Paints beats estimates in the second quarter as the decorative paints segment posts double-digit volume growth for the seventh straight quarter. And five Nifty companies, JSW Steel, L&T, Bajaj Auto, Hero MotoCorp and HCL Tech will come out with their quarterly numbers today. Let's first talk about the US markets. They ended lower as mixed corporate earnings dampened investor sentiment in trade yesterday. Ranita Young of Bloomberg News gives you a roundup of all the action on Wall Street in this report.
U.S. markets ended lower on Tuesday, even as the S&P 500 approached a record, all happening as investors continued to weigh a mixed corporate earnings results season. The very latest to come in just after the bell was Snap, falling post-market after missing analyst estimates and also dropping on weak guidance. We saw McDonald's also drop on weak domestic sales in the United States. However, we saw Harley-Davidson jumping as its earnings beat analyst estimates. During the session, we also saw a couple other things within companies' news. At one point, healthcare shares led the gains, with Biogen surging on news that it'll ask U.S. regulators to approve an experimental Alzheimer's therapy drug that it picks back up from March when it dropped it just for more research. Meanwhile, treasuries and the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index during the session rose, came off of those highs a little bit, however, and WTI crude oil rose to its highest in more than a week. And that's a look at your Wall Street action on Tuesday. In New York, I'm Ranita Young for Bloomberg News.
The pound was, of course, in focus yesterday, but we'll get to that in just a short while. Let's first take a look at how the Asia-Pacific region is trading this morning. I'm joined by Rosalind Chin, who's joining us live from the Bloomberg studios in Hong Kong. Good morning, Rosalind. How are we looking?
Morning. Well, you mentioned the pound. Of course, all that uncertainty related to Brexit is playing in the background here in Asia, even as the day develops. Although it is not the main focus probably at this moment in time, earnings probably are a bigger focus for many of the players here in this region. And partly that's because, we've had some major chip players, chip makers here in the region who have been suffering a little bit of late. We had some not great numbers out of Texas Instruments for their fourth quarter revenue forecast, trailing Wall Street estimates, and that has an impact on what's happening in Japan and South Korea as well, with some of the chip stocks there taking a bit of a hit. So overall, though, a bit of a lackluster day here, bit of a you're seeing a lot of investors sort of waiting around to see what's going to happen next. We have seen the MSCI Asia Pacific Index now dipping into negative territory, just about flat, but down minus 0.4% at this moment in time. The Nikkei and the Topix is just about hanging on to gains, but they're only up by less than a fifth of 1% at this point. We've got stocks like SK Hynix, Sumco, Renesas, Tokyo Electron, all losing at this point in time. In fact, Renesas is down by 4.7%. And Korea's Kospi is losing. It's down by 0.16% at this point in the session. So not a great outlook there. Really, no strong direction at this moment in time, with Asian markets looking mixed. We've got Hong Kong now. We have seen an FT report today saying that Beijing may be considering replacing the chief executive here, Carrie Lam, after these weeks and weeks, 20 weeks at least now, of protests that have been going on with no visible end in sight. We have seen the Hang Seng tumble at least 11% in the past 6 months or so. Stocks not doing that well in Hong Kong. Right now, the Hang Seng losing 0.04%. We may see a little bit of movement here in Hong Kong on the back of that Financial Times report. Finally, in Australia, the ASX S&P 200 losing a third of 1%, deepening a little bit into negative territory there. Some of the big players, Gold, Road Resources, Saracen Mining, Whitehaven, are making gains, but not enough really to offset the losers on that index. Finally, a quick note on Malaysia, because we've just seen some breaking news on the Bloomberg terminal saying that Malaysia is said to be privately discussing a $2 to $3 billion penalty for Goldman Sachs related to its 1MDB scandal. Publicly, of course, Malaysia has been talking about a $7.5 billion fine. So really, if that comes through, that will be rather a relief for Goldman. Back to you.
Thanks so much for that, Rosalind. Let's talk about what's making headlines across the globe. Sue Keenan of Bloomberg News brings you the first word headlines.
We start with Russia and Turkey, which have struck a deal to create a buffer zone in northern Syria. President Erdogan talked with Vladimir Putin for more than 6 hours before announcing the agreement. It includes joint patrols and coordinated action with Syrian forces to remove Kurdish fighters from border areas. The Kurdish YPG fought for years beside U.S. forces, but Turkey labels them separatists and terrorists. On to Israel now. Former military chief Benny Gantz will be asked to try to form Israel's next government. This after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu failed to build a ruling coalition. Gantz fought Netanyahu to draw in September's election and will now be given the mandate to form a parliamentary majority. However, he's expected to struggle as he lacks the backing of more than half of Israel's parliament. The top U.S. envoy to Ukraine, meanwhile, has directly contradicted President Trump's assertions there was no quid pro quo behind his July 25th phone call with the Ukrainian president. Acting Ambassador William Taylor made the claim in a statement to congressional impeachment committees. The president, meanwhile, has tweeted that the impeachment inquiry is what he calls a lynching, but added, "We will win." Mass street protests have continued in Chile, while President Sebastián Piñera met with political leaders to explore solutions to the crisis. The government says that 15 people have been killed in 5 days of rioting and violent clashes there. About half the country remains under an emergency decree or military curfew. The unrest was sparked by an increase in subway fares, but spread quickly into nationwide anti-government protests. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Sue Keenan. This is Bloomberg.
Right, let's turn to India now, and let's talk about the trade setup for the day in India. Darshan Mehta is joining me to tell you all about that and also what's happening in the futures and options space. Darshan, yesterday was earnings heavy. Today is going to be earnings heavy as well. A lot of Nifty companies between yesterday and today. How are we looking at the start of trade?
Yeah, so as of now, it looks muted at this point of time because the SGX Nifty is indicating a very mild outlook. Asia is not doing all that well. US also was equally muted. Now, take a look at what's happening. The SGX Nifty is up just 7 points at this point of time. Let's see how the ADRs panned out in trade. Infosys again, the pain continues. Firstly, the Nifty. The Nifty was down almost 73 points, and you can see that the mid cap and small cap were up in trade, and that was only on account of Infosys, which was down 16% in trade. And whatever money was there, the flows moved to the Nifty Bank and the Nifty PSU Bank. So only on account of Infosys, the Nifty managed to down. It actually snapped the 6-day winning streak. How did the ADRs pan out in trade? Tata Motors was down almost 2.5%. HDFC Bank and ICICI Bank, because of what happened, managed to move. And Infosys, the fall continues, another 2% down on Infosys on the ADR. So probably till over the next few days, that will wane. FIs, DIs, both of them were net sellers in the market, so there is enough selling that's happening in. Now let's take a look at what aided the contribution. Out of the 73 points, 115 point downtick was contributed because of Infosys. Bajaj Finance came out with numbers that was down in trade. Bharti Airtel was down in trade. What did well was the banking space, ICICI, HDFC Bank and HDFC. So they managed to help the Nifty even while Reliance was muted in trade. How do the F&O markets end up in trade? We're seeing that yesterday there were fresh short positions that were taken. Open interest was up almost 10% on the Nifty. Pull up the Bank Nifty. The Bank Nifty was up in trade, and there was short covering that was seen. Open interest was down 3% on the Bank Nifty. Let's take a look at where positions are taken. We are at the 11,600 mark in trade. So call writers are active at higher levels and put writers are active at lower levels. So on either side of 11,600, positions are being built. What happened in trade yesterday? Since the market managed to crack in trade, call writers became much more aggressive, and at lower levels, put writers were forced to cut positions, and that was only on account of Infosys. The other factors is the WIX. The WIXs have managed to stay at levels of close to 17. It was up 5% because the markets were down in trade. A couple of stocks that we need to highlight. First of all, the PCR. The PCR fell across all series. It was down to 1.20 since the Nifty was down in A couple of stocks you need to watch out for. Infosys saw fresh shorts, open interest up 32%. Jubilant Foodworks came out with strong set of numbers. Again, probably will react today because most of the brokerages have raised the target price on the counter. NIT Tech and Voltas was up in trade, and Interglobe Aviation saw fresh short positions. Among the counters that saw either short covering or long unwinding, there was short covering seen on Manappuram and Yes Bank. Manappuram trading at record highs. Nalco was flat in trade, but open interest was down almost 10%. Just Dial and CSC were the other two counters in focus.
Thanks so much for that, Darshan. I'll come back to you in very shortly on the earnings front, but let's talk about the Brexit first. There are updates therein. The UK will not meet the 31st of October deadline to leave the European Union, and that's because the UK Parliament yesterday rejected Boris Johnson's schedule to pass the bill in 3 days while accepting the bill in principle. This in turn may prompt Boris Johnson to call for elections. Anne-Marie Horden of Bloomberg News brings you the latest.
We're on pause at the moment. So tonight was quite dramatic. Boris Johnson was able to get that deal through Parliament. MPs basically voted that they liked the bill in terms of the principle of it. But when it came to fast tracking that legislation, that's where Boris Johnson suffered a defeat. So his promise to take the UK out of the EU, do or die by October 31st, is virtually impossible now. So basically we have to wait and hear what the EU says. We've already heard from Donald Tusk, and he says he's going to recommend that extension. The big question then comes, what happens when the UK gets that extension? Does Boris Johnson use that extension to get the deal in earnest through Parliament into legislation, or does he push for a general election? He did say, quite tellingly, when he was able to speak after the votes, that this deal would be the deal that the UK leaves the EU with.
What would a general election mean for Boris Johnson when you are seeing UK politics so fractured?
It's still so fractured, as you say. It's 100% right. From the 2016 referendum, the country is still very divided in terms of leave and remain. But Boris Johnson has pretty much done what he said he was going to do. Even tonight, he was talking about the fact that he has, put in place Operation Yellow Hammer, putting agencies on guard for a possible no-deal exit, even though with this extension, it likely wouldn't be possible. So he is leading in the polls, and he has a very good chance that if he was to win, he can come back in with a majority and get the deal he wants through Parliament. There is a risk, though. There's no certainty that that would happen. There is a risk, though, that he could lose power to the Labour and to the opposition party. I would, in this case, look at where the pound is trading. Pound has been trading relatively in this 129 range even today, and most FX strategists say the risk of a no-deal Brexit puts us into the 135. If we were to have a general election, though, Boris Johnson does have a good chance, given where he is now in the polls, Sherry and Heidi.
All right, well, let's turn to the big talking point today, which is going to be earnings. And first, let's talk about the country's largest two-wheeler makers, Hero MotoCorp and Bajaj Auto. They will both report their earnings today for the second quarter. The muted auto demand, which we've been speaking about over the past few weeks and months, is likely going to play a part in weighing down the numbers. Yatin Mota is here with what is priced in for both these companies.
Well, India's largest two-wheeler makers, both Bajaj Auto as well as Hero MotoCorp, will report their quarterly earnings. As far as Hero MotoCorp is concerned, we know that the industry is undergoing a big slowdown. In the second quarter also, Hero MotoCorp reported a 21% decline in the wholesale volumes because of higher inventory as well as general slowdown. And probably that will impact their revenue growth. In fact, we are expecting revenues to be lower by about 17% for Hero MotoCorp, with absolute EBITDA falling by nearly 26% to a level of 1,025 crores. And also profits are seen lower by nearly 21% for the two-wheeler major. As far as Hero MotoCorp's margins are concerned, because of lower volumes, clearly that will also be under pressure. And also, given the fact that the discounts are quite high in the industry at this point in time, margins are seen at 13.6% for the second quarter versus a level of 15.2%. Of course, the key factors to watch out for will be the inventory levels, in the system, and how is the management really looking at the festive season, because the feedback is that Dussehra period or the Navaratras haven't been that great versus the previous expected, sales volume. So clearly there is a lot of pressure in the overall demand for Hero MotoCorp. As far as Bajaj Auto is concerned, again here in the second quarter we saw a volume decline of 12%, including the export markets. If you look at the revenues, because of the decline in volumes, a 7.5% decline is seen there. Of course, the margins are under pressure because of higher discounting in the marketplace, promotions, as well as the operating leverage negative effects because the volumes are lower. So EBITDA on an absolute basis is seen lower by about 15%. Profits because of higher other income would be almost flat on a year-on-year basis to come in at close to 1150 crores. Margins also seen contracting to a multi-quarter low to a level of 15.7% versus the previous year same quarter level of 17.1%. Of course, the question that analysts would be asking to the Bajaj Auto management would be pertaining to the electric vehicle strategy, since they have now introduced the Chetak electric scooter. The final details are awaited, probably the management clarity on that, as well as on the export markets as to how really are they doing at this point in time is something important that we'll be watching out for apart from the quarterly earnings.
All right, let's turn now from the automotive sector to the infrastructure sector. The economic slowdown may reflect in Larsen & Toubro's earnings. The engineering and infrastructure giant is expected to report muted growth in the September quarter, with weak execution in both the domestic and international markets. Darshan Mehta is here to tell you all about what the markets are pricing in. Darshan, the headline numbers, and they don't look great as of now.
Yeah, so they will be weak given the fact that it was election, so everything was on a standstill and the international markets didn't do well. So on the top line, we are seeing close to a 10% top line growth that will come in. Profits, however, will be down because of lower other income this time around. Working capital was also stretched, so that will also impact the bottom line of the company. Margins, however, are expected to be stable, 11.5% versus 11.7% versus 11.5 versus 11.7%. It's interesting to see what they do as far as the order is concerned, because what they do is they give orders in terms of buckets. So if you compile all the orders that they have come in, on the lower end, it's close to almost 30,000 crores of orders, and on the higher end, it's close to almost 50,000 crores of orders. So we are anticipating anywhere between 40 to 50,000 crores of orders to come in as far as this quarter is concerned. Election and execution, again, there is a little bit of weakness that is there. Margins will be stable, and that will be driven by Mindtree because that will be consolidated this time around. Monitorable will be working capital, how the working capital is. It will be interesting to see how the guidance pans out. They didn't change the guidance in the first quarter. The revenue growth guidance was 12 to 15% for the company. The order inflow guidance was 10 to 12% for the company, and the margin tech services was 10.5%. So more than the numbers, it will be interesting to see how the commentary changes, because over the past few years, in the second quarter, they have been revising the guidance downwards. So it will be interesting to see more than the numbers, the management commentary becomes much more important.
There you have it. Thanks so much for that, Darshan. But let's talk about IT now. HCL Tech is expected to post a healthy growth in the second quarter as it fully recognizes revenues from the IBM products acquisition that it did. Agam Vakil is standing by with what the markets are pricing in. Agam?
So in comparison to its peers, we're likely to see sharper growth for HCL Technologies on the back of various acquisitions coming into play. To start off with the headline numbers, we're likely to see about 4.4% sequential growth in dollar terms, and in rupee terms, we're likely to see a growth of around 7%. Well, we are also expecting margins to expand to around 18.5% against 17.1% sequentially. The quarter-on-quarter 14.7% growth expected on the bottom line. Now, we will have the full impact of IBM products which the company acquired in the last part of 2018 to come into play as far as revenues are concerned, and that's the reason why revenues will look a tad higher. The revenues will be driven by IBM-led R&D and platform businesses. We also are likely to see some amount of momentum build as far as infra management services is concerned. Cross-currency headwinds are likely to limit the US dollar growth, but it's been a mixed picture, as we have seen in case of a lot of its peers as well, because we have seen the rupee, while it may have moved one way against the US dollar, it has moved the other way when it comes to euro and several other currencies in question. As far as guidance is concerned, we're expecting the company to maintain its outlook when when it comes to its revenue at around 14 to 16% in constant currency terms. Operating margins also expected to be maintained when it comes to guidance at between 18.5 to 19.5%. We are likely to see an organic growth for the company to be at around 7 to 9%. What are we keeping an eye on? Well, updates and further plans for products and platform businesses. Digital revenue growth, specifically in this case, we are also watching out for how Mode 2 and Mode 3 segments have done for HCL Technologies, and also if there is any impact when it comes to the corporate taxes on the company's profitability going in. On the whole, it's going to be a steady set of numbers for HCL Technologies in terms of expectations.
All right, well, let's talk about some of the stocks that you have to watch out for in trade today. Somit Sarkar is joining me to talk about stocks and news. Somit, yesterday and today, both earnings heavy days. I'm sure that a lot of the stocks on your list are going to be earnings related as well.
Well, yes, Alex, if you see key three Nifty companies that reported numbers yesterday post-market, I'll start off with Axis Bank first. Now, the results were above estimates with improved asset quality. They reported a loss, however, due to a write-down of deferred tax asset. That was because they have adopted the new corporate tax rates. The asset quality remained stable for the bank on the back of higher write-offs, strong receivables and upgrades, and the management believes that the loan growth will be faster than what the industry growth is for financial year 2020. Asian Paints, operationally weak numbers with net profit. However, the net profit was aided by some tax reversals. Decorative business segments in India registered a high double-digit volume growth for the 7th straight quarter. Gross margins expanded to 42.4% because of lower raw material cost. However, the company's average realization came down by nearly 6% due to higher growth seen in low price products and because of discounts given by the company. And another key announcement that came in is that the MD and CEO KBS Anand will be retiring from the post on March 2020, and Amit Singhal will be taking over KBS Anand. Bajaj Finserv revenues were up 47%, net profit increased by nearly 71%, but the key announcement that came in was that the Bajaj Life Insurance has signed a corporate agreement with Axis Bank in the second quarter of financial year 2020. RBL Bank, disappointing set of numbers on weak asset quality and net. However, the company's net interest income did meet analyst estimates, while profit dropped on higher provisioning. Management expects the total stressed account to be at close to 1,800 crore rupees, of which 800 crore rupees has been recognized as NPA and 350 crore rupees has been provided for. Also, the credit cost was higher, which also pulled down the company's net profit in the second quarter of financial year 2020. Mahindra and Mahindra Financial, mixed bag with stable asset quality but weak operating performance. Sharp surge seen in the credit cost and weak disbursement growth was noticed in the second quarter. Disbursement highlighted weak economic sentiment and sluggish rural consumption scenario, while the AUM growth of the company remained strong at around 22% compared to last year. CIAT, a weak quarter with 5% revenue drop and 30% drop in the net profit. EBITDA came in higher due to sharp decline in staff costs. Gross margin rose due to favorable mix and lower commodity prices. Finance cost, however, was up 2 times, while the raw material as a percentage of sales was lower at 58.9%. ICICI Prudential Life Insurance results were largely in line with analyst estimates. Strong protection growth, but there was a dip in the persistency ratios of the company. Protection business momentum remained strong, driving the VNB growth. However, the strong growth in VNB was despite the muted APE trends that we had seen in the second quarter of financial year 2020. Other stocks and news that we need to keep an eye out for: firstly, Lind India, they will be selling their Chennai and Hyderabad land to decommission air separation unit at Hyderabad, and they are going to get around close to 1,400 crore rupees from this sale of land. And lastly, Sterling and Wilson, where they have got a letter of intent for a project worth $635 million US.
Take a breath, Somit. You've given us quite a lot of stocks to think about. Thanks so much for that. Let's talk about a very interesting story. In fact, it's an exclusive, a BloombergQuint exclusive. The government wants to sell its remaining stake in 3 companies. While the proposal has been on the table for some time now, the urgency has been triggered by the economic slowdown that we're witnessing currently and the fallout on the fiscal position. Nikunj Ori has the details.
The government is considering sale of its residual stake in 3 private companies to boost its divestment proceeds at a time when a corporate tax reduction has been announced and the government stares at a revenue shortfall, as the revenue collections for the first half of the current financial year have not been as expected. The government is considering sale of its stake in Tata Communications Limited and is awaiting Supreme Court's directive as far as sale of its stake in Hindustan Zinc Limited is concerned. The government also wants the private owner matter of Bharat Aluminium Company, where the government owns about 49% stake, to list the company on exchanges so that a fair market value of these shares can be arrived at, and the government can go ahead and offload its stake in Balco Limited. According to BloombergQuint's calculations, the government stake in all these three companies is valued at about 33,000 crore rupees at current market prices. The government's divestment department under the Ministry of Finance has also written to Department of Telecommunications to identify all the assets of Tata Communications so that these assets can be sold off. The government has also asked Department of Telecommunications and Ministry of Urban Affairs if it needs any assistance with monetization of Tata Communications surplus land, which was recently hived off into a separate entity known as Hemisphere Properties India Limited. As far as stake sale in Hindustan Zinc Limited is concerned, the government is waiting Supreme Court's direction, as the Apex Court had recently asked the government to not offload any of its stake in the company that is majorly owned by Vedanta PLC Limited, and the government owns about 29% stake as of September 13 in Hindustan Zinc Limited. Over to you.
All right, well, that's an exclusive story, like I said, and you'll find it on the website BloombergQuint.com if you want to read it a little more carefully. Let me also take you through a couple more stories that you'll find if you look up the website as of now. First up, telecom operators Reliance Jio, Infocom, Vodafone Idea and Bharti Airtel have all cumulatively paid 4,500 crore rupees to the telecom department in spectrum dues in the last 3 to 4 days, according to sources who have spoken to PTI. Second, the Modi government has conducted a bureaucratic reshuffle. It appointed Tuhin Kanta Pandey as Secretary of the Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, or DIPAM as it is called. This came after incumbent DIPAM Secretary Anil Kachi was repatriated to his parent cadre on personal grounds, according to a government order. It also appointed Pankaj Kumar, the current Additional Secretary at the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, as the Chief Executive Officer of the Unique Identification Authority of India, or UIDAI. All right, that's all you need to know going into trade today, but there's a lot more to talk about, of course, and that'll come up in just a short while. This is Bloomberg Quint.